Yo, what a time to be a Chicago Bears fan. I mean that sincerely and without any of the irony that used to come attached to that sentence for so many painful years. Because we are living in a moment right now where the Chicago Bears are not just a team people are talking about, they are a team people are scheming around, building trade proposals around, identifying as a destination for legitimate impact players at multiple positions across the roster. And today we have got not one, but two major storylines to break down, and together they paint a picture of a franchise that has completely transformed how the rest of the NFL thinks about it. I'm Fave, this is Faves, and today we are going deep on a trade proposal connecting the Bears to New York Giants edge rusher Kayvon Thibodeaux, and then we are breaking down a full menu of additional moves, running backs, defensive tackles, edge rushers, veterans, and a couple of genuine long shots that could still reshape this roster before training camp opens. This is the kind of off-season content that gets me genuinely fired up. Let's get into it. Let's start with the Kayvon Thibodeaux story because this is the one that has been generating the most conversation, and I think it deserves a thorough breakdown before we start throwing opinions around. The report here centers on a trade proposal that connects the Chicago Bears to the Giants' edge rusher, who is entering the final year of his rookie contract after being selected 5th New York in exchange for Thibodeaux. And before we evaluate whether that is the right price, let's first establish who Kayvon Thibodeaux actually is and why this conversation is even happening. When the Giants drafted Thibodeaux 5th overall, the expectations were enormous. This was a player who had been one of the most hyped defensive prospects in college football for 2 full years before he actually entered the draft. Oregon built their entire defensive identity around him. Opposing offensive coordinators game planned specifically to account for him. He was the kind of player that college football analysts pointed to when asked to identify the next great NFL pass rusher. And then the NFL happened. And the reality of Thibodeaux's career with the Giants, while not a disaster, has not lived up to that 5th overall billing. He has had productive stretches. He has flashed the athleticism and the motor that made him such a coveted prospect. But the consistency has not been there. The dominant, disruptive, game-wrecking presence that Giants fans expected when they watched him at Oregon has not materialized on a week-to-week basis in New York. And now he is heading into a contract year with his future in New York genuinely unclear. Here's the situation from the Giants' perspective and why a trade actually makes football sense for them, even though trading your 5th overall pick feels painful on the surface. New York has been adding pass rush talent, Abdul Carter, Arvell Reese, young players who are being developed with an eye toward the future. The Giants are in a phase of their roster construction where they are prioritizing youth and long-term building blocks over proven veterans on expiring deals. Sound familiar? It should, because that is exactly what the Bears were doing 2 years ago. And in that context, the calculus on Thibodeaux shifts. Instead of letting him play out his contract year, potentially struggle to find his footing in a new defensive system, and then walk in free agency for nothing, the Giants could trade him now, get real draft capital back, and let that capital fuel the next phase of their rebuild. The report even notes that Giants general manager Joe Schoen explored the market for Thibodeaux during the April draft, reportedly looking for a 2nd-round pick from the New Orleans Saints before those discussions fell apart. That tells you the asking price. A 2nd-round pick is the floor of what New York wants, and the proposed Bears package, a 2nd in 2027 plus a conditional 4th in 2028, checks that box. Now let's talk about the Bears side of this, because that is where it gets really interesting for us. Ryan Poles has spent 3 years methodically and intelligently rebuilding this roster. The offense has been transformed. The offensive line is better. The skill positions are loaded. Caleb Williams is entering his 2nd year in Ben Johnson's system, and every indication from OTAs suggests the growth is real. But there is a consistent note in every serious analysis of this Bears roster: the pass rush could be better. Montez Sweat is a legitimate NFL edge rusher. Austin Booker is a young player with real upside who is trending in the right direction. But there is a significant gap between what the Bears currently have on the edge and what the truly elite defensive teams in this league are putting out there on a weekly basis. The report is explicit about this. If the bigger fish like Max Crosby or a Myles Garrett are simply unavailable or too expensive, Kayvon Thibodeaux represents outstanding value because of his age and his upside. He is young, he is still developing, and sometimes the best thing that can happen to a talented player who has underperformed in one environment is a change of scenery, a new defensive coordinator, a new system, and a fresh opportunity to redefine himself. Fave's personal opinion on Thibodeau: I am genuinely intrigued, and here is why. The Bears under Dennis Allen are running a sophisticated, multiple defensive scheme that creates favorable matchups through alignment versatility and creative pressure packages. Thibodeau has never played in an environment like that. He has spent his entire NFL career in a Giants defensive system that has been in various states of transition and reconstruction. You drop a player of his athletic caliber into Dennis Allen's system, with Montez Sweat drawing attention on the other side, with interior pressure creating confusion in the pocket, and you create an environment where Thibodeau can operate in the way he was always meant to operate in college, as a disruptive, one-on-one nightmare who opponents cannot fully account for because there are too many. Other threats to manage. The cost of a 2027 second and a conditional fourth is real. It is not nothing. But for a player who was drafted 5th overall and is still only in his 3rd NFL season, that is an acceptable price for a contender making a calculated push. Now let's pivot to the second half of today's story, because this is where things get really layered, and I want to break down each name individually before we start synthesizing what all of this means for the Bears' bigger picture. The report identifies several additional players Chicago could realistically pursue before training camp, and they range from genuinely realistic to wildly ambitious. Let's start at the top. Jonathan Taylor, Indianapolis Colts running back, one of the premier offensive players in the entire NFL. And yes, his name has come up in Bears trade speculation, which is both exciting and slightly jarring because running back has not been a position of significant need on this roster. Let me give you the Jonathan Taylor profile before we weigh in on whether this makes sense. 6 seasons in the league, averaging more than 1,500 total rushing yards over a full 17-game pace, averaging 14 rushing touchdowns per season, a legitimate receiving threat out of the backfield, and perhaps most importantly for a team that is trying to build sustainable success. He played a full season in 2025 after battling injuries in prior years, which significantly reduces the durability concerns that had been the one consistent question mark in his evaluation. His longest run last season was 83 yards. That is not just a big play. That is a home run hitter, a player whose presence on the field changes how a defense has to prepare, because any run from anywhere on the field has the potential to go the distance. The proposed cost is a 2027 first-round pick and a 4th-round selection, and the report rates the likelihood of this happening at 4 out of 10, which honestly feels right to me. Here is Fave's honest assessment of the Jonathan Taylor situation. I love the player. I think he is genuinely elite, but I have to look at what the Bears already have in the backfield. DeAndre Swift had over 1,000 rushing yards last season. Khalil Mondengai, a rookie, added nearly 800. Both of those players are young. Both are on cost-controlled contracts, and both are developing within Ben Johnson's offensive system. Running back in the modern NFL, as much as we love the great ones, is not a position where you surrender first-round draft capital unless the player you are acquiring is so far above what you currently have that it changes the fundamental identity of your offense. Jonathan Taylor is a great player, but is he so dramatically better than what the Bears already have that a first-round pick makes sense? For me, the answer is probably not. I would rather keep that pick and use it to add depth at a position of greater need. But I understand the counter-argument for anyone who believes Taylor's home run ability is the one missing ingredient in Ben Johnson's offense. Now let's talk about Zach Sealer from the Miami Dolphins, because this is the move that I think makes the most immediate and obvious football sense of everything in this report. Sealer is a defensive tackle, interior lineman, one of the most underrated defensive players in the entire NFL over the last 3 seasons. Last year alone, he posted 5.5 sacks, 47 tackles, and 10 tackles for loss. In the 2 seasons before that, he combined for 23 sacks and 23 tackles for loss. Those are numbers that would make him a household name if he played for a market like Dallas or New York. Instead, he has been quietly doing damage in Miami while the national media focuses on other storylines. His durability record is exceptional. 6 seasons, 2 games missed. That kind of availability is not luck. That is a player who takes extraordinary care of his body and brings a professional discipline to his preparation that every coaching staff values. The proposed cost is a 2027 third-round pick, and the report rates this one at 5 out of 10. The most realistic of the bigger trade options in the piece. And honestly, I think 5 out of 10 might be underselling it. Here is the problem that Sealer solves for the Bears. The defensive tackle position has been a consistent area of fan concern this offseason. People expected Ryan Poles to address the interior defensive line more aggressively in the draft. That did not happen to the degree some wanted. Sealer is not a project or a depth piece. He is a proven, productive, durable starter who immediately makes your defensive front better against both the run and the pass. A third-round pick for that kind of production and that kind of proven track record is not an overpay. It is a legitimate and sensible transaction for a team that believes it is in a Super Bowl window. Fave's personal opinion? If I'm Ryan Poles, this is the call I am making before any of the others. A third-round pick for a player of Sealer's caliber is absolutely the kind of aggressive but intelligent move that contending teams make. I would pull that trigger. Now let's talk about Leonard Floyd, because this one is both the least sexy and the most immediately realistic conversation in this entire report. And I want to give it the respect it deserves, even though it is not going to generate the same excitement as Thibodeau or Taylor. Floyd spent time with the Chicago Bears earlier in his career. He knows this city. He knows this organization. And while his most recent season with the Atlanta Falcons produced only 3.5 sacks and 5 tackles for loss, numbers that are well below his career peak, his track record as a reliable, professional, dependable edge rusher speaks for itself over a long career. The report projects a 1-year deal worth $5 million with incentive escalators that could push the total value to $9 million, and it gives this move an 8 out of 10 likelihood. 8 out of 10. That is not speculation. That is practically a transaction waiting to happen. Here's why Leonard Floyd makes sense for the Bears, even if it is not the splash move that gets the internet fired up. The Bears are going to ask a lot of Montez Sweat this season. He is the anchor of this pass rush and the defensive line's most reliable disruptor. But Sweat cannot do it alone for 17 games plus playoffs. You need depth behind him. You need a veteran who can give you quality snaps when Sweat needs a breather, who can line up in multiple positions in Dennis Allen's rotation, and who gives Austin Booker a veteran presence to learn from in the pass rush room. Floyd checks every one of those boxes at a price that does not disrupt the cap and does not cost draft capital. And bringing back a familiar face to a building that is now genuinely exciting, that is an easy sell. Josh Sweat from the Arizona Cardinals gets an honorable mention in the report, and I want to address it even though the likelihood rating is 1 out of 10, because the ceiling of that pairing is worth at least acknowledging. 12 sacks last season, 4 forced fumbles, paired with Montez Sweat on the other side of the defensive line. The report itself calls it what it is, one of the most dangerous pass rushing duos in the entire NFL. But at 1 out of 10, the report is also being honest that this is a near impossibility, and I respect that intellectual honesty. Some moves are fun to imagine and unlikely to materialize. Josh Sweat is in that category. File it under dream scenario and move on. Now let me zoom out and give you the complete picture, because when you put all of today's stories together, Thibodeau, Taylor, Sealer, Floyd, Josh Sweat, and the Myles Garrett conversation we have been tracking, what emerges is a portrait of a franchise that has fundamentally changed its status in the NFL landscape. 2 years ago, the Chicago Bears were a team that people identified on the schedule as a favorable matchup. They were a team whose players were being shopped to contenders at the trade deadline, not a team that was being identified as a destination. That dynamic has completely reversed. Now the Bears are the team that gets named in trade reports. They are the team that analysts identify as a logical buyer when talented players become available. They are the team that veterans look at and see a genuine chance to compete for something meaningful. And here is what I think the most important takeaway from all of this actually is. Ryan Poles does not have to make all of these moves. He does not have to acquire Thibodeau and Taylor and Sealer and bring back Floyd and somehow add Myles Garrett all before training camp. That would be reckless roster construction, and it is not how Poles has operated since taking over this franchise. What Poles has consistently demonstrated is the ability to identify which moves are truly necessary and which are noise, and to be disciplined enough to pass on the noise while being aggressive enough to capitalize on the genuine opportunities. The Bears already have a strong roster. They already have a legitimate Super Bowl contender in the making. The question for this offseason is not whether the foundation is solid, it clearly is, but whether one or two targeted additions can elevate this team from contender to favorite. Based on everything I have laid out today, if I am sitting in Ryan Poles' chair, here is where Fave lands. Zach Sealer makes too much sense at too reasonable a price to pass on. Leonard Floyd at $5 million on a one-year deal is a no-brainer if he wants to come back to Chicago. Kayvon Thibodeau is worth a serious conversation at a 2027 second and a conditional fourth. The age and the upside justify the cost. Jonathan Taylor, as much as I love him, is a luxury at a first-round price when this backfield is already functional. And Myles Garrett remains the dream that I am not fully ready to let go of yet. This Bears offseason is not over. Not by a long shot. And every day that passes with Ryan Poles still making calls and the rest of the league identifying Chicago as a destination, the more convinced I become that this team is building towards something genuinely historic. Monsters of the Midway is not just a throwback phrase. It is a promise. And right now, the Chicago Bears are in the business of keeping promises. I'm Fave. This is Faves. Smash that like button right now if you are locked in on this Bears offseason with me. Drop your comments below. Which move do you make first if you are Ryan Poles? Thibodeau? Sealer? Floyd? All of the above? I want to hear from you. Subscribe if you are not already part of this community, because we are going to be riding every single wave of this Bears offseason together. Bear down. See you in the